Hello class and welcome to our final module, the revision module. This module is a little different in that I'm not really providing a ton of material for you to read. You are reading that article in which writers talk about how they revise, but in addition, I just wanted you to hear some of my suggestions on how you should go about revising for your final project, and hopefully that'll offer the support you need so that you can make concrete changes to either your diss track, your scene, your short story, or your dialogue. So let's get started. That's not going to work. So the first thing that you want to figure out, or the first thing that we should all just clarify is this is what the assignment involves. So the revised piece is worth 10% of your grade, and I expect that your revised piece will be 5 pages in length. Now, if you choose to revise your diss track, you can approach this in one of two ways. You can revise your diss track so that it is 5 pages long, or you can craft 5 diss tracks so that you reach the page count, but you're also able to work on your diss track, because some of you had a really good time with creating those pieces. And so here are the instructions. After considering other writers' revision process, develop your own. Once you've decided what your process is, revise one piece of writing submitted this semester. I am grading this revision for attention to craft elements discussed all semester, attention to feedback I have provided, and for effort. Effort means, do I see significant changes in this draft compared to your first draft? And just a heads up, oftentimes in a creative writing class, folks put a lot of emphasis on proofreading. So, that maybe the first draft you misspelled a ton of words. For me, I do urge you to proofread because you should proofread anything that you submit, but proofreading does not count as revision for this project. So just be mindful of that. All right, so the first thing you want to do in completing this project is figure out which piece you want to revise. And so one way that you can figure that out is by asking yourself, which piece did you feel most excited by? Which piece do you feel most interested in changing? Or which piece are you ready to revise? So there's one of two ways you can approach this. The first is, I want to revise a piece that I had a great time writing, and even though I don't know how I want to revise it, I do know that it's an important piece to me, and I want to, publish it one day, so I'd like to use that for my final project. Great. You'd want to review the feedback that your partner gives you, review the feedback that I provided, and go revise and have tons of fun. The other way that you can approach this assignment, for those of you who are just more concerned, or maybe just concerned about the grade and want to get a good grade, is pick something that you feel maybe you struggled with, and now how you can improve the piece. And so what that usually means is picking something where you feel like you didn't get the best grade. At least that's what I suggest. I feel like if you didn't get the best grade, it implies that there's a ton of room for revision, which is actually a great thing for this kind of project. So that's the first step. Then you want to take whatever piece you've chosen and share it with a partner. You're able to choose who you want your partner to be. I suggest picking a partner from your reading group only because you have spent the entire semester talking to them. So you can do something as simple as, in your reading groups, just give someone the heads up that you want to work with them, and then exchange drafts either privately through email or within those discussion groups. It's your call. I also suggest that when you share your draft, give your partner a little note to let your partner know what you're really interested in getting feedback on. So, for example, you might write to your partner, can you tell me what you thought of the character's relationship to his mom? Also, how do you think I can make this character show his anger? So the more specific you are in your notes, the more your partner is able to provide concrete feedback that you can actually use to move your project forward. After you've done that, you want to look at your draft, look at your piece, and review the feedback that I provide. What did I suggest that you work on? And then how can I incorporate these changes that my professor has suggested that I make? So if I wrote something like, how can you show this and not tell this? Um, Going back and thinking about, well, how can I show what I'm trying to say here instead of telling the reader how to feel? All right, so to continue, view slideshow. There you go. So where were we? Okay, so when you're revising, after you've decided or reviewed how you're going to revise, you have to figure out like what strategies to use, right? It's the word revise is a very broad term, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming, and that's why we often resort to proofreading. And so my suggestion as you revise your final project is to revise specifically 3 to 5 craft elements, or the use of 3 to 5 craft elements. And what you can do is you can review the instructionals that your colleagues have submitted. You can review the material that I've shared with you about craft elements. And of course, you can review the feedback that I've provided and that your partner has provided to do this. What I want to do now is just sort of go through the different craft elements and the kinds of questions and strategies you can use when revising these craft elements. So first, the first craft element that we talked about is imagery. And again, imagery is attention to showing and not telling, right? So this idea that you don't want to tell your reader what characters are feeling or tell your readers how to feel. You want to show them, because that's actually the experience of literature, is the ability to see things and feel them for yourself. And so part of the way that you can show and not tell is through things like metaphor, simile, um, engaging with the 5 senses, and in terms of sound, alliteration, consonants. And so if you're revising imagery, you want to think to yourself, how can I incorporate more metaphors or similes? Or how can I improve on some of the imagery that I already have? And so here's an example. This comes from someone in this class. This was a diss track, and so I'm specifically interested in the first 2 lines. Today was a great day, made 10 grand, it was the day. So today was a great day, that's telling the reader something, but what would happen if you could show the reader that it was a great day? And so here's an example then of how you can sort of revise based on imagery and imagery alone. And so again, how can I show that it was a great day? How can I incorporate a metaphor to illustrate the value of making 10 grand in a day? And so here's an example of a change. 10 grand is so heavy in my pocket, my pants might fall. Even if they do, I don't care because I've got it all. So again, same sentiment, but I'm using imagery here. I have description, right? So I'm engaging with the visual of pants falling. It could also be seen as hyperbole, right? The fact that you have so much money in your pockets that your pants are actually falling. And I'm showing that this person, the speaker, is happy because even though their pants are falling down, they still are comfortable and fine because they have this money. So that's an example of how you can revise imagery. Here's another example. So this comes again from a short, I think a scene. Lucy says, "You are my only sister and I must always protect you. You don't need to thank me. Look, can you see the light? I think if we run up to the light, we are near safety." And then Gift says, "Yes, I see the light. Oh my God, what a huge relief." And so here, I'm specifically interested in Lucy's part. There's a lot of telling here, right? We'll talk about dialogue a little bit later, but you want to think about like creating conversations in which the characters show things about themselves, but they don't tell the reader or another character directly. Because in real life, when we talk to each other, we are not this direct, right? So, how could you show Lucy's deep love for her sister and deep desire to protect her sister? Well, let me try to engage in imagery. And so, here's an example of a revision. You don't need to thank me. Lucy furrowed her eyebrows at the idea her sister would ever come into harm's way. She grabbed for her sister's hand, tightening her grip until Gift understood she'd never let go. So what I did here is I shortened the dialogue, right? I've made Lucy do things that the reader can see and interpret, right? She's furrowing her eyebrows, she's grabbing her sister's hand and tightening her grip. All of these actions are showing the reader that Lucy really cares for her sister. The next craft element that you can consider revising is setting. And so if you're revising setting, you want to ask yourself, if you haven't really thought about place, how can you incorporate place into this draft? If you do have setting, think about how you can get your characters to interact with setting, because remember, setting is not this like static thing. Setting moves, people interact with setting. The other thing you can consider is how can I show tension in the place that I've described rather than telling readers there's tension. So there's this thing that a lot of you did where you would say, the gym was tense or the office was angry, right? Instead of telling us how this setting feels or how tense this setting is, what if you were to just show us that? And here's an example. It was a summer day, school was out, but outside it was far from summer. The rain was pouring down as the winds howled. Not an inch of blue sky was seen. It was almost pitch black. The lightning flashed like a flickering light bulb. So the setting details here are great, but what this writer does is they have the setting here and then they get into the character description. But what if you were to actually have the characters interact with this setting that you've created? And here's an example of what that would look like. Mr. Jones was reminded that it was summer because of the empty schools dotted around his farmhouse. He finished washing his last dish and searched for blue sky, but there was none. Rain poured and the wind howled, but Mr. Jones still thought of how awful the hot summer season would be. So notice here, Mr. Jones is now interacting with all of these different details that you've painted here. He's interacting with the rain by looking at it and still thinking about summer. He's interacting with this sky by looking for a piece of sky while he's washing his last dish. So this is another way that you can get your characters to interact with setting, and that's a revision. The next piece of craft element you can revise is conflict. So in your story, poem, dialogue, the first thing you want to ask yourself is there a clear conflict? If you don't have one, then the best revision you can make is to create one. And remember, when you're creating conflict, you're not creating a conflict like, Lucy wants acceptance or Lucy wants happiness. That's great in terms of real life, but in a story, you need to give your characters tangible wants. So instead of Lucy wants acceptance, you can do something like Lucy wants to win the spelling bee. That's a physical thing that you'll have your story work towards, or your play work towards, or your poem work towards. The other piece of craft element that you can work on is plot. First question you want to ask yourself is, do you have a clear plot structure? Are you using the hero's journey or the exposition, rising action, climax, resolution structure? That's the first way that you can revise, because if you don't have a structure, maybe you want to organize one, and you can use this for either a short story or a poem or a play. The other thing you can do is you can review your story or your play and see if there's any part that you can eliminate because it gets in the way of the action of the story. So a lot of you, for example, for your short story, have like 3, 4 pages of backstory, and then on the fifth page is when the action really starts. Well, what would happen if you just got rid of the first 4 pages then and start from the moment you introduce a character who realizes that he wants something? And here's an example. So this comes from another student in this class. Thank God, behind the fire truck was an ambulance where an EMT took Lizzie from Officer Brown's arms and placed her upon a stretcher. Bill shook Officer Brown's glove and exclaimed, "You guys are true heroes." Helen then hugged Officer Brown and said, "You are my hero for sure. God bless you. It's my job and I love every minute of it." And so, again, in terms of general revision, like you're gonna want to review like typos and also dialogue formatting, right? Every time a new person talks, it should be a new paragraph. Otherwise, this is really hard to follow. Um, but in any case, good luck to your daughter, said Officer Brown. Helen and Bill climbed in the ambulance and smiled at each other. Liz, you're going to be okay. We are going to the hospital and the doctor is going to take the fever away. They clasped each other's hand as the ambulance drove away with the blaring siren. So this student wrote, I think it was about a 3 to 4 page piece, and the majority of the piece is getting Liz to the ambulance. But the question becomes, is the action or is the real conflict and change happening when the ambulance drives away? If that's when the tension actually begins, then maybe you should start the story with they clasped each other's hands as the ambulance drove away with the blaring siren. So that's another way that you can revise. The other craft element that you can revise or incorporate for this final project is voice. As a reminder, voice includes diction, that means word choice, perspective, as in how does your character view things, rhythm, as in what, like, does your character speak super fast, super slow? Does he have an accent? Have you given characters or speakers particular perspectives or ways of speaking or vocabulary words? And if you haven't, then that would be a way to revise. Actually, give each character a distinctive voice. The other thing that you could look into is there a way that you can make your character's voice more consistent? Because some of you started off having your character sort of use certain words, and then by the end of the story, they sound like a completely different person. That's actually quite natural, but what that means is when you're revising, you want to go back and see which voice you want to use and stick with it. And so here's an example from a diss track. I was like, "Why are you always stalking me? Here you are, you just won't let me be, all up in the aisle, just watching, just creeping, saying I'm not working, not doing enough, not moving fast enough, not working hard enough, it's never enough, is it ever enough?" So here is an example of how voice sort of works out, right? So the diction here, there's a lot of enough in the second stanza. The use of questions would go towards rhythm. And the perspective here is it seems like this person views this other person that they're talking about as both um, a creep and overwhelming. And so that this is not really an example of like, I'm not changing it at all, but I'm just showing you how you can read your pieces and see if you have a clear voice. Now, I didn't post the whole thing, but towards the middle and end of this diss track, the voice starts to shift, and all of a sudden, like these sort of methods of delivery, like the use of I was like or the use of questions, disappears. And so it would be worthwhile to review why that happens and perhaps change it. The next craft element that you might revise is point of view. You can ask questions like, what point of view does, oops, that's a typo, does your piece use? Are you consistent with this point of view? For example, if you use first person, have you explored sharing the character's thoughts? Because when you're in first person, you don't just have to do dialogue, you can also give us the interior of the character, right? Think of Richie and how we're inside Richie's head and can see and hear everything that he is seeing and hearing. If you're using third person, you have sort of a world that you can explore. And so, are you actually exploring it? If not, then maybe that's a point of revision. And here's an example of the consistency question. Heat and light blind me as I fly backwards. So this implies that we're first person present tense. And then if we go down, it shifts to it sounded as if 100 bolts of lightning. So then we're back in past tense. You need to be clear on when and where in time your narrator is and be consistent. Stuff like this can be confusing for your reader because it's unclear if we're still in present tense or if it's a typo. So that's something that you can revise. The next craft element is character. And the basic way to revise character is just asking yourself, are your characters 5-dimensional? Can I see your characters? Do your characters have wants? Do your characters have internal or external conflicts? Do your characters do things? Do your characters have a distinct voice? If the answer is yes to all of these things, then great. Maybe character is not something you need to revise. If the answer is no, then maybe you want to go in and incorporate one of these or all of these dimensions. And then the final craft element that we discussed is dialogue. And so when you're revising your dialogue, you want to pay attention to subtext and text. In other words, are your lines of dialogue layered so it's not just what the characters are saying, but what's implied underneath what they're saying? And so Hills Like White Elephants is a really great example of they're talking to each other, but there's so much that's hidden underneath that conversation. The other thing that you want to make sure is happening is you want your dialogue to move the action forward. So, characters talking about things that we already know is not really moving the action forward, and you might want to remove that kind of dialogue. There's a difference between dialogue and small talk. Conversation about the weather for a page, or conversation about, you know, what you ate for dinner yesterday. That's okay in real life, but in short stories, it doesn't really work too well. And there's a difference between dialogue and bickering. Um, Quite a few of you created dialogues where the characters were bickering with each other, but it wasn't clear what each character wanted. So dialogue becomes dialogue when each character wants something and they're working through this dialogue to get their want. Dialogue ceases being dialogue and becomes bickering when the characters don't really have a want and they're just fighting with each other and it's not clear what the end goal is. The other thing that you should think about and consider is the way that you can use misunderstanding to create really interesting dialogue. So, a lot of times, what happens in plays, especially in plays, is you have a character say something, and the other character doesn't necessarily hear what the original character intended. So there's this misunderstanding. So, for example, Isabella says, I really hate this dress. And what Isabella is saying when she says, I really hate this dress, is she feels really insecure. And so the other character, Aaron, says something like, oh, yeah, well, I really hate my shirt. And so he misunderstands what Isabella was trying to convey, and from that we have a possible interesting dialogue. So here's an example from one of your scenes between Ashley and Robert. Ashley says, oh my goodness, are you okay? How do you feel? Robert says, I feel heartbroken, like a part of me is missing, like I'm not myself. I don't think I'm ready for this game later on today. Ashley says, don't worry, babe, you'll be fine. You're one of the strongest people I know. If there's someone that can put anything behind them and play, it's you. Do it for Barry. It'll be there in the crowd with your family, and you know Barry will be watching, just not with us. Thanks, babe. It'll head down to the locker room and change with the team. Come walk with me. So, in terms of, remember, subtext versus text, there is no subtext because it's everything that everything's being stated outright, which presents a problem because I'm not sure characters are as communicative as Ashley and Robert are. And so here's an example of how you can revise. Ashley says, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" Oh, sorry, no, this is. Ashley says, "Are you okay?" Robert says, "No, I don't think I'm ready for this game." So notice the difference. I cut down on a lot, but because I cut down, now there's subtext, right? Are you okay? The subtext there is Ashley thinking, oh my gosh, I really love this person and I don't want him to be not okay. Robert saying, no, I don't think I'm ready for this game. The subtext there is something has happened. I feel really unsure if I can ever be the same again without Barry. So, like I say here, sometimes characters asking direct questions and getting direct answers can be useful, but most times it's not effective storytelling. Think about using misunderstanding, diversion, avoidance in your dialogue. And then, of course, like I said before, minimal dialogue can be more powerful than super wordy dialogue. Here's another example. Ashley, you have to. I remember when Barry would watch you play, he was always so proud. So that's a shift from, don't worry, babe, you'll be fine. You're one of the strongest people I know, right? Here, the subtext in that is Ashley really feels like Robert's the strongest person that she knows, but because we're not saying that outright, the dialogue becomes more tense. Robert then says, thanks, I've got to go get changed. Walk with me. And so again, the shortening of this dialogue leads to more tension because we're unsure if Robert actually is feeling better, but we'll just have to wait and see based on how the play unfolds. So those are all of the craft elements that you can revise. And then just an overall suggestion, make sure before you submit your final project that you're looking at formatting issues. When a new character speaks, you need to indent. Make sure you're spell checking. Make sure dialogue has quotation marks around it. Make sure your tenses are consistent. And if you're writing a play, please be sure you look at the formatting guidelines for plays because it is quite different from short stories and poetry. I'm hoping that that was helpful. I look forward to reading your final project soon.